Yeah, look, you really need to make sure that you know how well their master sense is working. Is it working for them or is it working against them? And so, you've got any child not working to potential, any child in the bottom third of the class, you really need to be looking at a comprehensive vision exam to make sure that vision's not a piece of the puzzle.
Many parents worry when a child struggles with reading, concentration, or schoolwork. It's easy to assume it's behavior, attention, or motivation that's the root cause. But sometimes the issue isn't any of those things. Sometimes it's vision. Today I'm joined again by Paul Graham, Principal Optometrist at Harmony Vision Care on the Gold Coast, to talk about the connection between vision and learning and how hidden vision problems can affect reading, attention, and classroom performance, and what parents should look for. For those who are new to the channel, my name is Paul 𝗪𝗺 from Optics Digital. We help eye care professionals share educational information with their communities through videos like this one. So Paul, great to speak with you again.
Yeah, good to see you again.
So Paul, so when a child can't concentrate, how do you tell if it's behavior, attention, or actually a vision problem that's the cause?
Yeah, look, and whether it's a vision problem is the tricky one, which is why we often say it's a hidden vision problem, because it's not always something obvious like an eye turn or they're not seeing clearly. It's something else going on, and often the only way to really find them is to get a proper sort of full vision exam of all of their different sort of visual skills.
So what's the difference then between a quick sight test and a functional vision assessment?
Yeah, so everyone sort of often when you hear the word vision being used, often people are really meaning just sight, and sight is just a small part of the overall visual process. And sight is measured by when we look at the letter chart and work out whether you can see 20/20 or not, and whether a prescription restores you back to 20/20. When we talk about functional vision, it's more about how have you learnt to move your eyes smoothly? How well do you coordinate your eye movements with your head movements and your body movements? How well do you coordinate the two eyes together and coordinate the focusing and all of that going on at the same time? And then once you're able to do that, are you able to do it automatically? And if you're able to do it automatically, then are you able to actually use the information that you're getting in through your visual sense to learn and move through the world and those sorts of things? So functional vision is those things around how well you're using your eyes as a tool for learning.
So is this why some children might say that reading is hard or tiring, even though they've been told that their eyesight's just fine?
Correct. And so, if you do a screenings are great for picking up, obvious vision problems. Sorry, those rare but high refractive errors where one eye might be seeing clearly, but the other one's not, or some sort of eye turn, but they don't really delve into whether there's actually an issue with the coordination of the two eyes or a problem with focusing and those sorts of things.
So what actually happens in a children's vision and learning assessment at Harmony Vision Care?
Okay, so when you book in, we get you to fill in a questionnaire that gives us a background history on development health. We do a symptom survey, and the survey is designed to cover those more, not only sort of what we call visual symptoms, blurry vision, headaches, sore eyes, tired eyes, but also how it might impact on academic and learning performance. So we ask questions around how well they're paying attention, how well they concentrate, what do they have difficulties with. And then when we do a case history, we're asking some very specific questions of the kids and what we like to use is open questions. So we make sure we're not leading the witness. So we're not asking questions that sort of end in yes or no. So getting a sense of the things that the kids like and don't like, because that tells us a bit of a hint into things that might be visually difficult for them versus those that are easy. And once we've done a case history, we then get into testing. And, we will test the obvious things like, can you see clearly? Do you have much in the way of refractive error, which is myopia, astigmatism, long-sightedness, those sorts of things. But we then do a very extensive test of eye movement control. We call that ocular motor skills, eye teaming, which is also known as binocular vision, convergence, divergence, those sorts of things. A detailed test of accommodation, which is the technical word for focusing. And we're looking about the relationship of how focusing and eye teaming work together. And then depending on the age of the child and their presenting concerns, as we will do a screening of their visual processing skills. How well are they able to understand and manipulate mentally visual information presented to them? And then we'll wrap that up with some eye health screenings and eye health checks to sort of round it all out.
So it sounds like there's a subjective assessment component to it where you're like getting, responses and feedback from the patient, but there's also an objective element to it as well. So even if it's a very young child who's not very verbal, you can still test for functional vision.
Yeah, absolutely. And we do a lot of objective testing in terms of being able to watch how they focus, being able to watch how the two eyes work together. People sort of say, oh, look, like young kids, oh, they can't read the letter chart yet. Well, we rely on a lot of those observational tests, and also we have charts that are suitable for kids who are pre-literate. So we use Lear symbols, they're called, which are well-normed shapes to get us a very good handle on how well they're seeing.
And how long does the assessment usually take?
We normally book 45 minutes for an initial assessment, and that covers comprehensive history, doing that comprehensive exam, and then leaving plenty of time to discuss what we've found, what the alternatives of care are, once we've got all that information in front of us.
And do parents usually stay in the room during the assessment? I think it potentially could be a bit intimidating for some young kids.
Yeah, look, in our practice, we always have the parents there. There's always questions to be asking as we go along. We might observe something that would create a question where we say, hey, I've just noticed this. Does the child ever do X, Y, and Z? So something we may not have necessarily asked in the case history means we can kind of link it to something we're seeing. It also allows us to demonstrate some of the difficulties on the spot that we might pick up in children. So it's a very important educational piece to bring the parents on the journey of what's actually happening and how kids use their vision and those sorts of things.
Okay, so in the classroom itself, so what kinds of vision problems often get mistaken for, well, they just aren't trying or they've just got bad behavior? What kind of problems get mislabeled that way?
Yeah, and you're really centering in on a lot of those kids who have perfect sight, but then have underlying binocular vision or accommodation dysfunction issues. They might have some ocular motor dysfunction. So layman's terms, they might have issues with tracking, with convergence, and with focusing. And for some kids, a smaller proportion, they're going to have difficulties with visually processing and integrating that visual information with what they're getting from their other senses. And so naturally, if kids find something difficult or they're not understanding it, then they're going to either have concentration problems or they may learn that those particular tasks are difficult, so they opt out and they start opting out before they've even started. So it becomes this kind of almost like a pattern.
So what may look like a motivation problem could actually be a comfort problem where kids are just avoiding something that just feels uncomfortable for them.
Yeah. And I'll often talk to parents about there are two categories of symptoms, and I think we've mentioned this on other videos that we've done. Loosely, you talk about what we call eye-related symptoms and then performance-related symptoms. So eye-related symptoms are those things where I can have a discussion with someone who's not an optometrist and go, blur, double vision, sore eyes, tired eyes, headaches. We would probably agree that that makes you a bit suspicious of a vision problem. Whereas if we go performance, it's like can't concentrate, having problems with attention, losing their place with reading, avoiding, not enjoying, those sorts of things. And you can start blaming that on lots of other things like attention, behavior, interest, those sorts of things, when quite often it can actually be driven by a vision problem, wholly or in part.
So you mentioned tracking before. So just to clarify, that means like kids are struggling to read one line to the next. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, and I like to break that down to parents that we can have a tracking symptom, which is that losing place, not being able to kind of keep check on where you're going with your writing. And you can have a tracking problem, which is a measurable issue with how well you've developed your eye movements, whether it be what we call as pursuit eye movements, which is the smooth ones, or a saccadic eye movement, which is our jumping eye movements.
So you mentioned something important there, I think, is when I'm thinking about this, the first thing I think of is reading issues, but you actually mentioned writing as well. So are you saying that these kind of functional vision problems can affect kids with their motor skills or their handwriting at least?
Absolutely. I mean, there's a critical link between fine motor skills and your visual system and being able to execute. And if you think about it, and we do see this sometimes, is we'll have kids who have learnt to read fairly efficiently and they're really good readers, kind of sampling the text. They're looking for the cues that tell them about what the author's trying to tell them. So they're not in the decoding phase anymore. They're not having to look at all the various parts within a word and then perhaps not even looking at every single word to be able to get the author's message. But if you shift across to writing, you cannot avoid interacting with every single letter, every single word, spacing and all the rest of it. So it can be a lot more visually demanding. And so you might get this child who has this kind of excellence in reading, but the spelling doesn't sort of add up to the same degree. But you also get into things like spatial awareness. So kids who may not really be able to judge space very well, don't have an understanding of where to start on the page. How much room have I got? They're the kids who start too far into the page and then run out of space and start writing the letters smaller or turning down the margins as they write.
So do teachers often notice these signs before the parents do? Because I imagine, they see a lot more evidence of their struggles with reading and writing.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes there's also, you'll occasionally get a difference where parents will, the teacher will notice something, but the parents haven't seen it, because in a one-on-one situation at home, the kids don't have then the additional having to filter out noise in the classroom, the other sort of distractions. And teachers are well versed, obviously, on getting a sense of expectations on what a child at a certain grade or age level should or shouldn't be able to do. And so they can be particularly good observers. And we'll often, those questionnaires that we send out to parents, will often send out a separate one for teachers to fill in, so that we can kind of get a judgment on, the home situation versus the classroom situation.
And I guess a lot of, kids at home, they're not often reading things on a whiteboard or a blackboard across the room, are they? So it's a different kind of environment.
Yeah, and they're able to sort of work to their own level sometimes, rather than sort of being stretched like they might be in the classroom.
Okay, well, just a quick reminder that if you're getting value out of this video, do us a big favor, please, and give us a like, because it helps us out with the YouTube algorithm, so other people can benefit as well. All right, Paul, so are there any simple things that parents and teachers can watch for that suggest it's time for a proper eye and vision check?
Yeah, look, and you've got the obvious things like holding the book close to the page, getting close to the page when they're writing, closing one eye, even it may not even happen in the classroom. If they're closing one eye in the sunlight, that can be an indication that there's perhaps some eye teaming problems going on. The headache that they get in the car, sometimes headaches can be blamed on dehydration when it's an end of day headache from stress in the classroom. So you've got those obvious things. Then you kind of get into more your performance related kind of symptoms. So if they're losing their place while reading, especially if you notice that they start the first paragraph okay, but then start to fatigue fairly quickly, I mean, that's a fairly good sign that there may well be a vision problem. But we have a sort of a broad caveat, and you kind of go, well, look, vision is your master sense. If you've got any concerns about your child's progress, whether they be in the bottom third of the class or just not working to the potential that you can see there, and they've got these kind of parallel things where they seem to be able to, intelligent kids be able to talk about this sort of stuff, but can't put it down in writing and have trouble doing this sort of schoolwork. So any concerns over progress with learning really, for me, is a big marker that you need to make sure that your top two major senses are checked out, and that's vision being number one and number two being hearing.
And is there any particular age where you see these problems start to show up more often?
Yeah, look, and if you put it into a couple of different categories, we've got we loosely talk about the first couple of years at school being the learning how to read portion, and then you move into sort of late grade 2, grade 3, grade 4 in using reading for learning. And so you're getting into kids with more the maybe issues with vision and auditory processing in those younger years. Maybe they don't quite have their ocular motor development quite being where it needs to be based on their age, so they're not quite ready for certain things. And so younger kids will do a bit of a perceptual workup to kind of, they're good predictors to kind of flag, hey, be watchful that your child might find certain things a struggle. Once we get into, like I said, late grade 2, grade 3, there's a lot more emphasis on a greater volume of print, trying to work out and what the author's trying to say. So there's a lot more comprehension and cognitive skills going on. And the print size jumps smaller. So there's no developmental sort of change to how print size changes. It goes from being fairly big, remove the pictures, make them pretty small. So there's a lot more demand there. And so we'll pick up kids maybe grade 1 where we can see that there's a little bit of a binocular dysfunction brewing away, but they currently don't have symptoms. And then they return to us in maybe a year or two time, and now they're getting the symptoms because the demand has shifted.
Is there an age where it becomes too late to intervene? I mean, there might be some parents watching this thinking, well, I've got like a 15 or a 16-year-old or a 17-year-old and thinking, well, we've missed the boat. So what would you say to them?
we often say to parents, look, if we find a vision problem that we are fairly confident is currently interfering or did interfere with optimal learning, then there is an avenue still to treat and manage the vision problem, but that doesn't necessarily give the child the love of learning back. So there does need to be some motivation to kind of continue on and get some tutoring and do some catch-up sort of work. So that's a challenging age group where, yes, look, we can still manage the vision problem. And I'll often have adults where we're testing them, and I can say, "Oh, have you found reading a bit of a challenge or not concentrating well?" And I go, "Well, how did you know?" It's like, "Well, I'm seeing this binocular vision problem that I know often starts in primary school, and the outcome is that it makes reading uncomfortable, so people avoid it, and so this is this cascading thing." So, these are vision problems that can persist into adulthood.
So it's like if somebody, avoids playing sport because of whatever reason, they're not going to suddenly develop a love of sport necessarily at 15 or 16. So it's kind of like ingrained behavior that requires a little bit more effort to turn around.
Exactly, and that's the thing that the sort of overcoming the previous sort of barriers and history still requires probably more motivation than they had when they were younger, and we can provide some of the ways of just removing those barriers so that their efforts, I call it a comorbid sort of situation. You've got this almost double deficit. I've got a learning problem and I've got a vision problem on top. We remove the vision problem, we've still got a learning problem. That doesn't mean that the vision problem is unimportant to remove. It's very important, because the very group who has to put in more work and more effort is that the group that's having trouble learning, and so they deserve to have their vision problems removed and managed as much, if not more, than other people.
Okay, so if a child has already passed an eye screening, but they still struggle with reading or focus, what should parents do next?
So the first point is to investigate getting a full visual exam done, finding someone who will do the full workup. So you're asking questions around, do they measure tracking, do they measure eye teaming, do they measure focusing, and do they measure processing skills where indicated. So it's making sure that whoever practitioner they find is going to provide those things. One of those measurements can also be that often the people who, like myself, who are engaged in this sort of area of practice will provide a report after the exam is done. And so the questions are around what sort of things do you assess, and do you provide a report at the end? Can be a good interview question if you're researching a practice.
What would you say to a parent who isn't sure whether their child needs this kind of assessment, or maybe they're confused about whether ADHD or dyslexia is a factor?
We get referrals from a lot of psychiatrists now, and part of the workup for their patients who they're investigating, things like autism, attention deficit, dyslexia, involves making sure that we've fully covered visual skills, sight, those sorts of things. Visual skills in particular, because if we have a look at the ADHD population in particular, convergence insufficiency is a well-researched binocular visual dysfunction. It creates ADHD-like symptoms. And so it's good to know whether some of those symptoms might be as a result of a vision problem, as opposed to just purely to the attention deficit. And there's a bit of an association between those two groups, that you have a threefold prevalence of people with convergence insufficiency in those who have been identified with ADHD, and vice versa, those who have got convergence insufficiency. There's a threefold prevalence of attention deficit in that group. So, we've got to be careful not talking cause. We don't magically remove the ADHD by treating a convergence insufficiency. But again, if we go back to that comorbid things that we talked about, we're removing a vision problem in a human being who can then have more of their sort of concentration and attention and time available to then concentrate on whatever developmental issue that they're dealing with at the same time.
All right, Paul. Well, your final gold nugget of advice for parents who are worried that their child is struggling with reading, attention, or schoolwork, what would you like them to know before they write off their kids as just lacking academic ability?
Yeah, look, you really need to make sure that you know how well their master sense is working. Is it working for them, or is it working against them? And so, any child not working to potential, any child in the bottom third of the class, you really need to be looking at a comprehensive vision exam to make sure that vision's not a piece of the puzzle.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, Paul. It's been great information, I'm sure, for a lot of parents and teachers on the Gold Coast who are trying to support children with their learning goals. So if a parent's concerned about their child's vision, how can they get in touch with Harmony Vision Care?
We've got 𝗲𝗿𝑒𝑣�isionCare.com.au. They can call us on 0755205900. You can book through the website. You can contact us through the website if you've got questions. We're on Facebook and Instagram, and obviously we've got this YouTube channel as well.
That's right. So please subscribe, like the video, and share with a parent, teacher, or friend who you think might benefit from this information. All right. Well, thanks for watching, everyone, and we'll see you next time. Bye, Paul.
All right. Thanks.